Okay, and thanks everyone for adding, your name typically shows up as your Zoom participant name, but if you could also in the chat pod, all participants could add their state, their SPDIG, and your role with the SPDIG, that will help our speakers to get a sense of who's on today. Okay, great. I see a lot of people on. All right, so we are right at the top of the hour, whatever that hour happens to be for you. I'm Jennifer Coffey from OSEP. Thank you everyone for joining today. We have a nice selection of people I can see. Thank you for those of you who are entering into the chat. You can enter your name and then the state that your SPDIG is in and your role in that. And then here's the thinking, the quote that is, I've been trying to come up with a good name for these opening polls. So if anyone has a nice idea, a little alliterative name is always nice. But just so research shows using better instructional materials boost student outcomes just as much as having a better teacher at the front of the room. So I'm interested to hear what your experience has been related to this. And I'm also interested to hear, what does this mean for the SPDIG? So having this piece of data, what does that mean for the SPDIG? You're not the director at a district or a principal at a school. You are likely not in the curriculum office at the state level, but what does it mean for your SPDIG work? So I'm gonna be quiet for a minute, give you a chance to think and add into the chat pod or use your microphone, your thoughts on this idea.
Be available after the conclusion today to be sent to you, including the chat box transcript with the research.
And while people are thinking about it, I know Paula Crawford and Paula in North Carolina had a conversation and some of what North Carolina does to support the use of high quality instructional materials. So Paula, if you want to weigh in at all, you are welcome. Okay, well, as people are thinking about that and hopefully adding something to the chat, I'm going to go ahead and do a real, high level overview of what we're going to talk about today and talk a little bit about our speakers. I'm going to let them introduce themselves because they're all interesting people who, have a lot more to say about their interests and their experiences than I could do justice with. So we have Jim Short, The Elements, co-author along with Stephanie Hirsch. And of course, The Elements is the challenge paper. And we sent an article about that and also the link to the challenge paper itself. It's a challenge paper about these effective curriculum materials, what it means for professional development and what it can then mean for student impact. So we have the co-authors of that paper here. We also have 3 people who were kind enough to donate their time and preparation and to participate with us today. We have Sandra Alberti from Student Achievement Partners, Michelle Bowman from Learning Forward, and Lauren Weiskirk from Ed Reports. Now, Michelle, just to give you a preview, Michelle Bowman is working on her dissertation right now and is going to give us a preview of it. And I think it's something that's going to be really useful for our work. I just wanted to give you a heads up about that. All right, and I see some people in the chat are adding some thoughts about what that means to have a curriculum that has proven effective as part of your professional development. Great. All right, so I think I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our team. Should say our team of presenters, and first with Stephanie Hirsch. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. We're excited to be with you today, and we were really honored to have this opportunity to share what we learned through the research and then the ultimate publication of the report. And we were thrilled when Jennifer reached out to us and asked us if we would be willing to come and share it with the SPED. And then we said, of course, but we want to bring some other great talented individuals who we know could even speak even more directly to some of the implications within the report. And so you'll have an opportunity to hear from the entire team of colleagues throughout the presentation today. I thought that we would begin with a check-in poll. And we have 3 questions for you to consider. And so we can learn a little bit more about you. And while you're looking at those questions, can everybody see them?
Yep, they look great.
Okay. Okay. So I'll give you a minute to respond. I really appreciate the comments that I'm reading in the chat regarding Jennifer's opening question. It makes me feel like a lot of what we have planned is what you're expecting. So that's always good. So we'll give you another minute. Make sure you scroll down and you see the 3rd question. So I haven't used a poll in a while, so Len, are we almost able to show the results?
Yes, we're at 72%. Would you like to stop at this point? Or?
That's fine. That sounds good.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so it's good to see that some of you are somewhat involved with the selection and supporting of instructional materials. That's going to be interesting to think about the implication of that after the information we have to share today and how you think about your role in relationship to that, because I'm going to make the assumption that that might shift in the way that you view that question. Your familiarity with the research on the impact of curriculum for students. So most of you are somewhat familiar with it. And I think today will be the opportunity maybe to affirm that maybe you know more than you thought you did, or deepen your understanding and appreciation of it, and how familiar you are with curriculum-based professional learning, how important that is to your current role. And we have a lot of variety in the room. And I guess I hope that we make the case that you will want to see it as even a higher priority for your work in the future. So thank you for taking time to do that. We'll see by the end of the session what you're thinking at that point. And you'll have the opportunity to give us some comments throughout. And you're always welcome to add comments and questions in the chat box. And since there's so many of us presenting, we'll also do our best to respond to those. So we will move on and actually start with that first question, which is, what is the impact of curriculum? And what is the impact of curriculum-based professional learning? What do we know about it in relationship to student growth? And one of the ways of thinking about the importance of focusing on curriculum and curriculum-based professional learning comes from the work of Dick Elmore. In his work, he found that there were basically 3 levers that we had for improving student learning at scale. One is the level of student engagement, and that can be impacted by the quality of instructional materials that guide teachers in the lessons that they deliver each day. Another is the rigor of the content, and that is influenced by the standards and assessments. We have higher standards, we have better, higher standards, we expect more of students. So we want to make sure the content and the rigor of instruction meets those standards, and the assessments measuring how well we do. And then finally, the quality of the teacher's knowledge and skills. And we know that the key way that we influence that is through professional learning. So we use the words instructional or curriculum materials interchangeably. And people frequently ask us, what do we mean by those terms? And maybe since you read the paper, you probably saw this, but we wanted to reiterate for those of you who may not have had time to read the paper yet. And so we want you to know that when we talk about high quality instructional or curriculum materials, we're referring to a comprehensive set of materials that include not only individual lesson plans, but they have unit plans and they may be entire course materials. And they also include information to support research-based teaching. They have the support materials for the teachers, and they have the embedded formative assessments. When we use the phrase educative curriculum materials, then we're talking about materials that address both the student learning and the teacher learning. So why does curriculum matter, and how do we know it matters? And there's a person who's going to speak with you a little bit later is going to really make a case for this. So let me just hit some of the highlights right now, some of that data that you may be able to use in the future to support your thinking and your work in this area. In the first study on the left, you can see that the effect size of several interventions is compared, and all of those listed, better curriculum has the greatest impact as compared to, for example, a Teach for America teacher in reading. In the second study, it distinguishes the effect size when comparing two different teachers using well-designed math lessons. And what it shows is that using these quality materials had a greater impact on the teacher who's from the 20th percentile, but also still had an impact on the 80th percentile teacher. And in the third study, all teachers were using an integrated improvement model. And what this study showed was that both the curriculum as well as the curriculum-based professional learning had impact on the students. In fact, they showed an estimated of 4 months of learning improvement over 2 years. And while the professional learning had a slight bit more impact, it's really both of them contributing and both of them having a powerful effect together on the students. And in this final study, this one was that showed again that the positive effects for students were amplified when a strong curriculum was paired with strong professional learning. And not only are the students working with more rigorous instructional materials, but they also have a more skillful teacher to guide them. This study found that when the teachers participated in curriculum-based professional learning, their students' test scores improved by 9% of a standard deviation. Those are just 4 of the many studies, as you read the paper, that you probably saw that we studied and read deeply in order to bring these conclusions to you. And for us, the implications are clear. Curriculum matters, but how teachers use curriculum matters even more.
So I'd like to
turn it to Jim.
Thanks, Stephanie. So I'm going to talk a little bit about introducing the paper. The goal of a Carnegie Corporation Challenge paper is to lift up ideas and issues in a way that will influence the field and the nation's agenda. The subjects and questions that we explore and the issues we frame grow out of our grant-making work. This challenge paper explores how professional learning anchored in high-quality curriculum materials can allow teachers to experience instruction as their students will, change instructional practices, and lead to better student outcomes. So what did we do and how did we come up with the elements? In the fall of 2019, Carnegie Corporation convened a group of grantees in the education program's leadership and teaching portfolio made up of leading curriculum developers, organizations that support teaching and learning, and their school and district partners. Over 2 days and later in more than 24 follow-up interviews, we asked questions, listened closely, and learned. We learned about the specific challenges schools and systems face. What logistical hurdles were the toughest to overcome? What worked and what tactics helped reset expectations for what students and teachers could do? How did support from outsiders help build a stable base for change? And what learning experiences did teachers value most? And then we conducted an in-depth analysis of the research and what the evidence had to say about their successes as well as their challenges. The elements were identified to inform the design and implementation of curriculum-based professional learning. We think teachers deserve the highest quality professional learning to support the implementation of new instructional materials and curriculum. In the report, we identify a core set of actions, approaches, and enabling conditions that affect schools and that effective schools and districts had in place to reinforce and amplify the power of high quality curriculum and skillful teaching. The elements of curriculum-based professional learning, or simply the elements, provide essential guidance for transforming teaching and student learning. So before we dig into the elements, let's listen to a district story about supporting teachers to learn how to use new instructional materials. Brian Kingsley is the Chief Academic Officer in Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools and leading the implementation of a new K-8 language arts curriculum developed by EL Education. As he talks about their curriculum work supporting teachers, listen and take notes on the key features of their implementation and professional learning efforts. Listen for what you think are the elements that ground their curriculum implementation efforts. He begins by talking about the expectations of teachers and how the district leadership responded, and goes on to talk about what they have learned over the last couple of years as they work to roll out a new ELA curriculum in the district.
They were deeply appreciative that we helped them internalize the content, but also began building a bridge of how that informs instructional practice. Early on, we only talked about internalizing the content because the investment was just so large, but they were craving for the how. They wanted to know how this was going to help solve, create equity, help children succeed, how they were going to, it also helped them kind of walk away from practices that no longer serve them. And what I mean by that is like the consistent use prior of like leveled readers. Like it helped them kind of get a piece of how to scaffold complex text, how to ensure that people, like it helped them challenge their own beliefs around what kids can do. I think that was an essential takeaway and component. It also helped inform us too into, as we move into next year, that one model and one track of professional learning is not a one size fits all in terms of learners, right? Like we need, and like we're learning that now in the remote stance, like how do we provide multiple opportunities for people to internalize and approach and process this in various ways? And how do we tweak like the formats, the modalities, empower people differently? So it's not just central office or people from EL. I think those were really, really important things. And I also think it helped, you know, and I'd like to say this was by design. Some of it was, but I think I'm happy that it came out this way. It began to build an enthusiasm in the schools for those who were not yet implementing, right? Like they saw the pain, they saw the complexity, they saw the district stay the course, evolve based upon how they were, you know, what they were saying. And they began seeing children interact with curriculum and begin to write and express themselves very differently. And to me, that's another PowerPoint of the investment, is that because it's quality has to win at the end of the day, right? Like in quality content, to me, like if children don't begin to change and how they show up in the curriculum, ultimately we don't have a chance of sustaining this kind of change. And I think for teachers who didn't initially come on board, that were not pioneers, or you know, whatever word you want to describe those, sometimes that are kind of early out, racing ahead of the group. It's the children that end up changing them in their minds, in my perspective, not just their peers. And you know, I'll say the last thing, you know, key takeaway is our theory of action started with being direct to teacher. People were feeling overwhelmed. Thought leaders wanted to stay ahead. We were responsive to that. But where we've ended in our feedback was that they want to go back to direct to teacher. They want a hybrid of both, which I think is a really huge win. And it forced us to think differently about our professional development calendar so we can free up the time and the space. So we're not pulling people out of classrooms with students and able to free up the time. And there's a study out there that says like a sweet spot for an ROI on professional learning is about 48 to 50 hours of job embedded learning for us to be putting it into practice. So we carved out 8 days of professional learning direct to teacher next year. And that's in addition to those other vehicles for PD that I mentioned, our communities of practice, direct to principal. And so I'm really hopeful, not just for new teachers that are coming on board, but that will continue for teachers that implemented this year. Like that doesn't go away. We're going deeper for teachers in K-3. Like your learning is going to continue.
So we offered these as the elements and essentials of curriculum-based professional learning that we're going to investigate throughout the rest of this session. It's simple, right? Well, sort of. Making professional learning work for teachers is a simple concept, but one that is very challenging to execute well. Teachers must experience the same kind of inquiry-based learning we expect them to provide their students. Whether it's ELA, math, or science, students take ownership of their learning by solving problems, making meaning from text, and investigating phenomena. Teachers deserve the same opportunities to learn new ways of teaching that support this type of learning. So let's dig into the elements to better understand what the design features and enabling conditions of curriculum-based professional learning look like. First, we have the core design features that identify the purpose of curriculum-based professional learning and include curriculum, transformative learning, and equity. Brian talked about the role of high-quality curriculum when their decision why to select the EL Education Language Arts curriculum for their students. He talked about curriculum building a bridge to inform instructional practice. While their initial professional learning focused on the launch of the curriculum and introducing the new content, he also talked about the need for helping teachers shift their beliefs and transform their teaching practices through ongoing job-embedded professional learning. The role of equity was central to the work. He shared that teachers wanted to know how the new curriculum would create more equitable opportunities for student learning. He mentioned how the curriculum could help teachers scaffold complex text to ensure more equitable instruction and also help challenge teachers' beliefs about what students could do. So curriculum builds teachers' disciplinary content knowledge, pedagogical knowledge, and pedagogical content knowledge by using high-quality educative instruction materials. Developing fluency in a curriculum doesn't mean simply following it to the letter. Teachers should still adjust instruction to meet students' needs. Curriculum materials and support can help teachers become comfortable with learning activities that keep students on track to meet ambitious goals. Educative instructional materials help teachers anticipate likely challenges, offer context and suggestions, and prompt teachers to rehearse instruction with a wide range of student questions in mind. In other words, talking points, not a script. Transformative learning changes teachers' deeply held beliefs, knowledge, and habits of practice through intentional design. Experiences are needed here, not speeches. School districts spend thousands of dollars on motivational speakers, and most professional development takes the form of one-time seminars. However, teachers are active learners who construct their knowledge and beliefs based on direct experience. Teachers need experiences in curriculum and instruction to see how an approach benefits students rather than just hearing about it. And finally, equity articulates and advances high expectations for all students and applies culturally relevant pedagogies and content consistent with a shared vision for teaching and learning. Every student should have access to high quality, demanding curriculum and opportunities to think critically. Every teacher should know how to scaffold learning experiences so that students are supported to engage with complex materials and activities. Promoting equity means avoiding strategies that leave underprepared students out of standards-aligned learning based on their current skill level. If a discussion centers on a highly complex text, for example, a teacher can read the text to less prepared students and engage their thinking at a complex level, even if the prerequisite skills are not fully established. When teachers develop deep expertise in content, curriculum, and instructional strategies, they can apply relevant tools and supports to ensure underprepared students complete challenging work. In other words, scaffold, don't simplify. And now we're going to hear from Lauren talk a little bit more about what these core elements look like in action.
Hi, everybody. Lauren Weiskirk, I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at EdReports. And, oh, there's my video start. There you go. Hi, I'm calling in today from Portland, Oregon. I have been at Ed Reports for 6 years and came to this organization, you can read a little bit about on the screen, came to this organization after working at New York City Department of Education, where we realized that teachers were clamoring for high quality instructional materials and there was nothing on the market that would meet their needs. And so, you know, I remember teachers often saying like, I'm being asked to do an impossible job. You're asking me to like fly the plane while I build it. And there's a whole bunch of other, you know, metaphors that we can pull from. But the enduring takeaway was all of these materials are being marketed to me that they're aligned, that they support this type of rigorous instruction and have teacher supports. I don't see it. And so at Ed Reports, we set out to review all the materials out there that claim to have this type of rigor to support students, to support teachers, and have this strong foundation. So how do you know if you have a strong foundation? We reviewed about 90% of the market, and roughly half of the materials available in K-12, ELA, and math do meet these expectations. And so when you think about your roles in supporting schools, districts, coaches, whomever, with high quality materials, one of the first things to do is to know, do your materials meet? So one way to do it is to go to Ed Reports. You can check out our free reviews. They're always there for you. But if our materials haven't been reviewed, and also for your own professional learning or learning of coaches, today I wanted to provide some information for you all about the characteristics we look for in helping determine whether or not materials are providing that foundation. So first, let's think about the students. So high quality instructional materials for students, going back to that equity component in the elements, they are aligned to grade level standards and they are coherent. They provide that building block to help your students progress kindergarten all the way up through 12th grade. In addition to having that rigor, we're also talking about that they are designed for each child's regular and active participation. So there are strategies built into the materials for supports for students in special populations. There's varied approaches to tasks. You can demonstrate your learning in multiple ways. All of that can be included within high quality materials. The consequence, if you don't have this foundation, is that we see teachers spending about 7 to 12 hours each week on the internet trying to create their own lessons in order to fill gaps on this first bullet point. And I've always been struck by the director of Special Population State of Rhode Island. He once said, oh, if the average teacher is spending 7 to 12 hours a week to get materials up to this foundation, that means my teachers are spending double the time. They're working to get materials up to this foundation, and then they're spending the additional 7 to 12 hours figuring out the appropriate accommodations for the students that are in their classrooms, or the students that they're coaching, or the teachers that they're coaching. Dr. Santeliza's the chief in Baltimore City. You can read her quote there. One of the things that Baltimore is experiencing is that by having the strong foundation for students, it really frees up the conversation to be about the type of work that we know teachers excel at, they're amazing professionals at, which is meeting the needs of the kids in their classrooms and designing really engaging and inspiring learning environments and meeting them exactly where they are. And that's what the power of the foundation can be for students. If we think about the foundation for teachers, and then go to the next, yeah. Here's some look fors in your curriculum that are on the page here. Materials themselves, and this gets to that word educative that Jim just talked about. Materials themselves, when they're educative, help teachers learn the content and teachers understand pedagogical shifts in the materials. And so going back to the transformative learning of improving your practice, thinking about how to design an inquiry-based classroom experience for your students, programs that meet these characteristics here on the left are really helping the teacher know how he or she can be approaching the content. And I saw there's questions about, script fidelity versus integrity. this is about integrity, right? You can have the high quality content, and these are all the ways that the materials can support you in designing your lesson plan, designing your instruction. And when the materials themselves are really strong, I love this quote from the elementary school teacher in California. Her district was moving from a math curriculum that was pretty old school and was not high quality in terms of the content that students were going to be able to access. So by going through this process of selecting a new curriculum and then actually looking at the materials, she was blown away that yes, students are thinking differently, but she can sink her teeth into the materials for the next 2 to 3 years. She says 2 to 3 years, 2 to 3 years, 4 to 5. All of this is going to come with that really strong professional learning that now we have the opportunity for because we've got the strong base. And so here are some of the characteristics and look fors that you can find in high quality materials. And I think the question for you all that I would have is, as you work either directly with teachers or you work with coaches or you work with districts to select materials, how can we introduce that there are expectations for quality that support teacher practice in addition to expectations for quality around aligning to your state's content standards?
Can I ask you a quick question, Lauren?
Yeah, please.
Good, thanks. So of course we have What Works Clearinghouse at the U.S. Department of Education, and that looks at various elements of core programs and interventions, but specifically looks at, has it had an impact on child outcomes? That's one aspect. So how do you all connect with the What Works Clearinghouse findings? Is there, or has there been a connection between those two?
Oh, so I absolutely, thank you. We always say, look at multiple sources of information. So you come to EdReports to look at the information available about what the content says it's providing and what the content actually is. That's one really good way to know like what's behind the sticker.
Mm-hmm.
When there are really strong research studies that can make it past the efficacy criteria for What Works Clearinghouse, absolutely go there too. The question becomes, when you have newer materials that are doing some of these innovations that are actually having the, for example, the educative teacher components, you can't always wait for a RCT. And so the question then becomes, how do you find those research-based elements within the materials, know what's in the content there, and then the RCT trials, our studies will come, later, and then make their way into the What Works Clearinghouse.
That's helpful. Thank you so much, Lauren.
Oh, and Sandra, excellent point in the chat about rarely considering the connection with professional learning. I'll let, Sandra, when you get to that point, please expand further, but that's a solid addition. Thank you.
So now we'll look at the structural elements, and these are probably the ones that everybody is most familiar with. So let's take a quick look and see how Brian referenced them in the audio tape. So first thing he talked about was the need for different models of professional learning as the district moved beyond the initial launch. And he noted that, one model is not going to fit all, and that we need to have multiple models to address the needs of our teachers. They also talked about the need to recraft professional learning time. They needed to make sure that beyond the launch of the new curriculum, that teachers needed more time for in-depth and ongoing opportunities to work together. They were going to need to think differently about their collective participation in the way that they use their learning communities. And he mentioned specifically that the district was going to expand the calendar to allow for 8 days of professional learning throughout the year. And they were also going to be supporting principals through their own community of practice. Let's go look at these in just a little bit more depth. And you can see the definitions for these structural design features. Let me say a little bit more about each one as you read the definition to yourself. Under collective participation, we want to reinforce the idea that curriculum-based professional learning establishes curriculum study, practice, and reflection as the main subject of teacher and leader meetings. It's not an optional discussion item at the end of these meetings. It's the focus. And at the same time, it ensures that well-prepared facilitators are available to each professional learning community. And there's an opportunity in there to identify and support teacher leaders who can grow into these roles in future years. In terms of models, in particular, when we think about curriculum-based professional learning, summer institutes are often used to launch at the beginning, but they are not the end. It's not come in for 2 days, tell us about the curriculum and move on. Curriculum-based professional learning continues throughout the school year. It takes many forms, and it always includes the work of the professional learning communities as well as instructional coaching. It must be ongoing and sustainable, which means it cannot be led solely by experts, but that schools and districts must plan for the future by building the in-house expertise and the leadership pipelines. And finally, in terms of time, we have to think and identify new ways of creating time for professional learning. We think about all the alternatives to late start days, early release days, as well as adding more days to teachers in the calendar. And then as we add time and devote more time to curriculum-based professional learning, then we also need to be accountable for the impact of our investment. People want to see that it's making a difference. So we thought we've gone through two parts of the element design, and we thought this might be a good opportunity for you all to reflect in the chat box, to ask questions or to make a statement. We're going to do this twice. We thought right now we take about 5 minutes for it. And maybe we could even bring everybody back into the room. Everybody could turn on their cameras, read comments, bring back my co-presenters and anything that came up. And Lauren, I wanted to ask you a quick question because I've heard you talk about this and I'm not sure everybody heard it. In part of the assessment that you all make in the materials, you are looking for how the materials address the needs of diverse learners and give help to the teacher in thinking about that in the classroom. And I thought that all of our participants would be interested in that. And maybe you said it and I missed it. Do you want to say anything else about that?
No, it's great. I think thank you, Stephanie. Any opportunity to say it again, if I didn't say it, I will take. When we talk about quality of materials, we are very much talking about them being for all students. And so going to the point of, one of the major points of the elements paper is like the equity component that all students will be able to access standards aligned grade level content. That doesn't mean just provide the content and then hope teachers figure it out. But there are actual specific grouping strategies, assessment strategies. How are you looking at your data and then informing how that, what you're going to do in your classroom the next day? That is baked in to this definition of quality, because without it, you're not actually supporting teachers and being able to move their practice and meet the needs of all students. So, part of that is the tools and guidance and support for acting on data. And I think another one is there's grouping strategies, and then how are students able to display their knowledge and display their skills? And so it's not within the curriculum, it's not an assumption of a one size fits all demonstration of mastery.
And Lauren, I've also heard, it was probably a couple years ago where I challenged you and Eric because somebody brought up this question and somebody raised it in the chat box as well. How are the UDL principles embedded in for the states that use UDL, for people who buy into that and want to see that. I know that you all have an answer for that. So can you address that too? Sorry to keep putting you on the spot there, but.
Oh, no, it's fine. No, it's fine. We've worked with CAST before and have, one of the questions that we get often, and we also provide back, particularly to those who are more, who are working every day with students, is how how UDL principles, what they look like in materials and what they look like in practice. Like what they look like, how the teacher is taking UDL principles to her work, right, into her planning and taking the materials for the students in the classroom. And so when you look at some of, like, for example, our reports, and you get the details that we provide in Gateway 3 about how the materials can support teacher planning and execution, there's a great combination there. What you don't see in UDL principles is a materials must have this, right? But materials must provide for the flexibility for teachers to be able to take that work and that planning and bring it for the students in their classrooms. So, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to let Jim kind of come in on this because Open SciEd found a way to integrate UDL into their curriculum-based professional learning. Jim, did you want to comment about that?
Sure. So it's part of this idea of the materials being educative, not just to help teach students, but to actually provide support in the teacher-facing materials to give advice, cues, support for teachers in the how to teach the curriculum. And so throughout the lessons, at the lesson level, they will incorporate UDL and supports for multilingual learners, so that instead of just helping teachers understand strategies in general and leaving it up to them to apply those strategies in specific lessons, we find that it's a lot more useful to connect the specific strategy to the specific lesson. So then the teacher knows, oh, this is the best strategy to use at this point in this lesson to help with sense making or meaning making or something like that. And so educative materials, when done well, embed that in the teacher materials.
But Jim, I also heard you say, like, the teachers first need that great foundation in the curriculum. I know in Open SciEd, they introduce that later after teachers have had some experience in the profession in using the materials too.
Right. It comes back to the point somebody made in the chat about not contributing to the overwhelmness of teachers, right? They first need an experience to just understand, how does this instructional model work? What is an activity like? What's it feel like to kind of be given this text or this task or this problem to solve, and to actually give teachers a chance to experience that kind of learning. And then when they've gone back to the classroom and had that experience using the materials with kids and seeing how they're working, then they can come back and reflect on things like differentiation, or how do you facilitate discourse, or how do you go deeper into formative and summative assessment. But if we pack all of that in at the very beginning of introducing them to the curriculum, it's like turning on a fire hose, and it's just too much for the teacher to take on.
Jennifer, I wanted to comment about your question about the What Works Clearinghouse, because actually I have two different thoughts on that, and they may not be popular. So anyway, something to think about. I think, first of all, the hardest choice districts, schools have to make is that they have limited professional learning time, and then they've got to decide what's the priority. And if they truly believe that curriculum and they have high quality materials and they believe implementing it is the priority, then they're probably not going to be looking at What Works Clearinghouse for what other programs they can implement at this time. And until they really have some level of comfort and sophistication with their curriculum, and they begin to find the gaps that it's not addressing, and then I think you go and look at what works potentially to address some of the gaps. And one of the other nice things about Ed Reports is it also kind of tells you the strengths of the curriculum you're working with, as well as the gaps. So I think you could even go looking in what works to fill some of those gaps as well. But I don't think it's a place you start. I think our point of view, obviously, today is that start with knowing your materials and what they have to offer before you move on. And speaking with moving on, are you okay if we do that?
I am. I did want to, at some point, if we have a moment, I really you all have touched on it a little bit, but the high quality instructional materials and UDL and integrity, we've touched on it a couple of times, but if we have time to get deeper into Kate's thoughts, you know, what's happening at some point, I would love to do that. So I just
Yeah.
want
Okay, we'll invite her back in too, because we'll have 10 minutes at the end again.
Perfect.
So we'll do a little bit more sharing and then we'll come back together. Does that sound okay?
sounds great.
Okay, Jim?
All right, so I'm going to come back to some research as we then get ready to dig into the functional elements. So what does research tell us about how teachers change? There are three major goals of professional learning programs: change in the classroom practices of teachers, change in the attitudes and beliefs, and change in the learning outcomes for students. So what do you think is the sequence in which these outcomes most frequently occur? In other words, in order to facilitate change, what is the most effective sequence? So you've got four choices here, A, B, C, and D. Take just a minute, think about which one makes the most sense to you based on your experience, and then we'll see what research tells us about teacher change in terms of the most effective sequence for this. Which one comes first? Which one comes second? And then leads to the third?
And Jim, I would put money on this group probably will get this right much more frequently, or across the participants much more frequently than any other group would, I think. So we'll see.
Well, we didn't do a poll, so we're not going to actually know what people chose, but the particular research this was taken from promotes the idea that we first give support for teachers to change or be willing to try something different in the classroom. So that's the role that professional learning can play. And when they see the impact that that has on students, and hopefully it's a positive impact, that then over time, they then start to change their beliefs. I think sometimes we fall into the boat of we could just change teachers' beliefs, then they would start teaching differently. And unfortunately, it's the doing something and seeing the result on students that then starts to chip away at our beliefs. And so that sort of brings us to thinking about the functional design features that inform how professional learning, curriculum-based professional learning works. And it includes learning designs, beliefs, reflection and feedback, and change management. As already mentioned, if we go back to the story of listening to Brian talk about the work in Charlotte Mecklenburg, he talked about the need to shift teachers' beliefs about what's possible for students and how to use the new instructional materials to meet this challenge. He also talked about this shift in beliefs happened, as we were just talking, after students experienced the curriculum and responded in ways that showed teachers it was working for their students. So similar to the research on teacher change that we were just looking at, the sequence of change Brian was talking about was first helping teachers learn to change their practice, which then led to changes in how students were learning. And then that led to teachers changing their beliefs. He even talked about the role that students played in this process to help teachers make these shifts in their teaching and changes in their beliefs about learning. In terms of reflection and feedback, Brian talked about the role of student impact on outcomes and how the district used evidence to inform interventions and support teachers over time with the implementation of new curriculum. Several times, Brian talked about the importance of change management. When teachers were feeling overwhelmed, leaders in the district needed to be responsive and think differently about what professional learning support looks like. When teachers saw students respond differently to new instructional materials and expressing themselves differently, teachers were more interested in interacting with the curriculum differently as well. He also commented on how the early implementers of the curriculum began to build enthusiasm in schools for those not yet implementing new instructional materials, which helped bring other teachers on board to learning about the new curriculum. If we take a little deeper look into these four elements, learning designs engage teachers as learners through inquiry and sense making while using the same instructional materials their students will use. This requires shifting teachers' perspectives. Rather than tell teachers about the curriculum, let them experience it for themselves. Putting on a student hat can help teachers trust that student-led discussions can be productive and anticipate questions and ideas that likely will surface. Think of it as a mirror image. Teachers should engage in the same sort of inquiry and reflection that they will have their students engage in. In curriculum-based professional learning, teacher learning is the focus and the goal, so each activity engages teachers in discussions and reflection about what contributed to their development. Beliefs are defined as addressing teachers' ideas and assumptions about how to teach specific content, how students learn the same content, and how higher quality instructional materials provide productive ways to support student learning. In other words, rock the boat by kickstarting new ideas. Give teachers evidence of what works and ask them what they think about it. A disruptive learning experience, such as putting on a student hat during a model lesson or seeing a lesson taught in an authentic setting, can launch a conversation on teachers' assumptions about instruction. Discussions or reflections about beliefs often start with general statements of values, such as all kids can learn, but they must go deeper than that. Individual teachers have built their belief systems over time, and they won't all need the same type of disruptive experience to prompt change. Learning experiences should be tailored to schools and teachers, and efforts to make meaning and resolve cognitive dissonance should be connected to teachers' own students. Facilitated conversations and well-chosen writing exercises can prompt teachers to think critically about their practices and students' experiences. Reflection and feedback calls for facilitated time when teachers think about new instructional materials, receive input on how best to use them, and examine student work and assessment data and make changes to instructional practices in response. In years past, teachers were left on their own devices and provided feedback only during performance evaluations. Curriculum-based professional learning is less hierarchical and more constructive in its feedback and processes. At each stage of the learning cycle, teachers reflect individually and jointly on their instruction in the curriculum, both in facilitated conversations and in response to writing prompts. Observations and feedback distinct from formal performance evaluations are conducted by instructional leaders, coaches, and peers. And finally, change management means addressing teachers' individual concerns and group challenges when implementing new instructional materials, including explicit opportunities to discuss and troubleshoot issues. Change is a process, not an event. Change isn't the difference between before and after. Rather, it's an ongoing disruption of thinking and doing. It requires adults to make and remake their knowledge, actions, and beliefs, which requires attention and energy over time. Important change happens over 3 to 5 years, not during a single launch period. And now Sandra is gonna lead us into thinking more deeply about these functional design features.
It's actually Michelle, Jim, but that's
Oh,
okay.
sorry.
No worries at all. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michelle Bowman, and I am a Vice President of Networks and Content Design at Learning Forward. I've been working there for about 6 years, but my previous 24 years was really working in school districts and math and curriculum and professional learning and high school administration. And, I have this great desire and commitment to see professional learning redesigned. All of my spare time goes to study and scholarship, as I'm a doctoral candidate, and I'm anticipating my graduation is going to be December of this year. Well, not anticipating, it's going to be December of this year. So you've heard Jim and Stephanie talk about the structural elements and the functional elements. And really what I'm excited to do is to talk to you as leaders and evaluators who work at states and universities and other support organizations. You have a great deal of reach, right? You talk to the leaders in systems. You talk to others who are in your parallel fields. And so when I think about the elements enacted, particularly the structural elements, right, which really focus us on the design parameters and the setting for curriculum-based professional learning, and also the functional elements, right, as Jim just described, which really are about the process for designing and implementing this curriculum-based professional learning, while we're making sure to attend to supporting the change management process. I really want to focus in on dissemination, integration, and investment. And so my encouragements to you are these. You need, and you have the bandwidth, and you have the authority and position to disseminate what curriculum-based professional learning needs to look like, and to also be able to provide this as a focus for your stakeholders. So I would ask you, right, consider how might you use your current meetings, future meetings, summits, symposiums, to be able to build capacity, not only among yourselves, but also among others. Second, as these intermediaries for these funds, you also have the opportunity to consider how you might integrate the elements of the components and the actions suggested when you are looking at partnerships, either identifying new partnerships, evaluating current partnerships. So maybe it's about including the key aspects of the elements into grant requirements or future RFPs or even review processes. It might even be useful to think about the elements as lenses for evaluating current professional learning, including the practices, the guidelines, and recommendations that you're making and supporting. And third, I would encourage you to invest in building the capacity of others, especially your professional learning designers. And here's where my bias and experience is going to show through. As many of you know, there is a solid research base that supports Etienne Wenger's community of practice theory, which I'm a student of. And there are also multiple studies that evidence the benefit and the value of a community of practice that has a professional learning focus. And you heard Stephanie unpack early on, especially what happens when curriculum-based professional learning is at the center of the work. Well, my own research and literature review actually makes the case that collaborating within and across schools or systems improves teaching and student achievement. And as I'm working on my dissertation, I'm actually testing this theory with a community of practice of school district leaders. And their focus is on designing and redesigning a system of professional learning. And I'm looking to see how their work in an inter-district community of practice is changing their knowledge, their understanding, their behaviors to operationalize and redesign a system of professional learning. So my encouragement and challenge to you is, might you need to shift the focus of an existing community of practice such that it centers on the collective participation of those who are involved, where they're looking at how to design and implement the curriculum-based professional learning in special populations. I know you're gathering folks together and that's important, but gathering people together and getting better is not enough. So I would also ask us to think about your communication channels and how are you sharing and spreading the stories and the successes of the various use cases, right? Through your blog posts or audio segments and video examples. And I know I've just offered some challenges there. I would say I want to offer you now a couple of protocols that might help you activate my suggestions. So the first one, I imagine you're very familiar with Laser Talks, but I wanted to just provide you with a really simple frame to deliver the message in a succinct way and that is powerful, where you can really influence who your listeners are. Of course, you know, a Laser Talk is just a brief conversation, 3 components. The first one, you identify the problem. In this case, it's a need for curriculum-based professional learning for leaders that are serving special populations. Second, you'll offer relevant solutions. And that solution is curriculum-based professional learning as evidenced within the elements and the challenges therein. And finally, in your Laser Talk, right, you'll actually make the case and a call to action. And as you were reading the elements paper, you actually have seen this in action, because the end of the elements paper includes a call to action with suggestions for the various roles. And we'll get a chance, I think, toward the end to talk about that. And, you know, even if your audience is new to the ideas and the research behind curriculum-based professional learning, a Laser Talk is actually the best tool for these conversations because it causes those decision makers to reflect. And it also helps them realize what they do not know and has them think about why they actually need a deeper knowledge about the elements in curriculum-based professional learning. So the next protocol offers a resource to support evaluating current or potential partnerships. It's just a series of questions, and I actually adapted this from a resource that we have at Learning Forward that's about thinking about district partnerships for professional learning. But instead, I went to the elements and I reframed the questions to align with the recommended actions. And so this is one way, one set of questions that you might use to determine the extent to which your key partners are actually sharing the same commitment to advance teacher professional learning in this way. So again, I recognize that you don't always have direct access to teachers, but your positions support the key decision makers who are responsible for the structure and the functions to put curriculum-based professional learning at the forefront and to anchor it in high quality curriculum materials. And that should be at the center of the change efforts to transform teaching, especially for the folks who work with special populations. Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle. And now we'll take a final look at the essentials. And I'll just kind of give you an overview because I think, again, these are some that you're probably very familiar with. But let's go back to the audio tape that we listened to. Remember, Brian is the Chief Academic Officer in a large, diverse school system. His vision for curriculum implementation and curriculum-based professional learning is one, that we wish many of our leaders in the country shared. Brian talked about the role that teachers played in helping with the rollout of the implementation of the new materials beyond the initial pilot phase. He also shared how school and district leaders listened and they worked with the teachers to help address their concerns so that they could continue to build more ownership as well as take on ownership in using the new instructional materials. Brian talked about some of the enabling conditions that supported the implementation, including the large investment that the district made in purchasing the materials. Obviously, the investment being one of the resources, as well as its partnership with EL Education. Technical assistance is often a big resource investment, and then providing time for the teachers and the leaders to participate in the curriculum-based professional learning. And in terms of coherence, if we'll go forward, Jim, I wanted to talk about it from the essential slides. Coherence is probably one of the newest ideas in terms of something that we haven't seen before, listed among elements of work like this. And in this case, we're talking specifically about curriculum-based professional learning. And we mean that in that context, that our system and school policies, practices, priorities, and curriculum are all aligned to a shared vision of learning and teaching. And coherent curriculum-based professional learning helps teachers understand the structures underlying the high-quality instructional materials, that it guides teachers along a path to mastery, building their expertise through successive experiences and opportunities to reflect. And by contrast, in less coherent schools, you often see a scattershot approach. You see solving problems as they occur. While professional learning can be responsive to teachers' evolving needs, its general trajectory should conform to a learning progression grounded in the curriculum. And this is particularly evident when teachers are involved in curriculum-based professional learning using high-quality instructional material. Coherence is the challenge that we frequently hear, and I know I'm eager to hear how Sandra's going to help us think about it through her work with the Common Core standards. So Sandra, I'm going to turn it to you.
Thank you very much. I'll turn my camera back on. So I may be as excited to talk about it as maybe you are, Stephanie, to listen to it. So Sandra Alberti. I currently work at Student Achievement Partners for the last 11 years. And every time I say that out loud, I kind of take a gulp. It is the longest I've ever been at a place. Certainly part of that is that we engage in regular learning, and that is kind of like what gives me joy and meaning in this work. But before that, I think particularly relevant to this conversation is that I did work at an SEA. I was part of the New Jersey Department of Education for about 5 years during the years that led up to Common Core development and adoption. And then soon after that, in 2010, went to work at what was then kind of a 3-person operation and a little bit bigger now. And so, you know, listening to Lauren and listening to Michelle, within the context of curriculum-based professional learning, have done a lot of reflection over the years about the things that we have done as an organization at Student Achievement Partners, and in my own work from district all the way through states, where we miss the critical piece that Stephanie kind of ended us with around coherence. And so as a former science teacher, the whole idea of the elements, gives me great pleasure in kind of living in that world of thinking about science. And certainly the concept of coherence is very true in science, that things have this magnetism and stick together. And in the world of standards, and in the world that we're talking about here with curriculum-based professional learning, there is this really important element of coherence being kind of like what connects concepts. But the reason why that is so important is because there is a natural sense making required in order to build that sense of coherence. And so in our own work at Student Achievement Partners, kind of stemming from the writing, development, and then subsequent adoption of the standards, we thought about things in very typical ways, in silos, and this kind of diagram that you see on the slide here, like, kind of speaks to a lot of this. Like, yep, let's get some things right about assessments. And, we all know where that went. We had to get assessments that were aligned to standards. Then we had to get materials that were aligned to standards. And then we had to start talking about practices in classrooms that were aligned to standards. But none of that was about coherence. None of that was about, well, why am I doing that? And we had lots of districts across the country still to this day who were making decisions about adoptions and purchases that could have checked up one of those boxes, but never would have made a difference for students, and certainly would not have made a difference for students with special needs if they thought that the work was just put that stuff in front of a teacher, put that stuff in front of a kid, and magic will happen. And so what I so much appreciate about the element component to curriculum-based professional learning is that it is kind of like this notion of, what is your vision for students? What is your vision about what should happen between students and teachers every day? And let's bring into that conversation how that is also to be held true for students with special needs. And that isn't just a belief system, but situated within this system of curriculum-based professional learning. It is a learning agenda. It is something that we need to do more than just care about, but it's something that we need to develop skills and get good at. And so I feel that that is such a strong component of taking this challenge paper into action, is to think about each of these elements. And so when I think about, if you could go to the next slide, the idea of leadership. So often, and there's all these people who have written and talked about things, as state agency folks and as people who are giving all the good advice, we're really good at talking about what needs to happen. But we don't so much talk about how that happens. We don't talk about why that needs to happen. And I think, Michelle, Lauren, Jim and Stephanie did a great job today talking about the evidence base behind some of these things. What is it that, is keeping us on this really hard work? Because I will tell you that one of the biggest hurdles that we all face in this collective work is that there are people who think, high quality instructional materials come with an ease of use, that what makes it high quality is that it is easy to use, easy to manage. And so to the comment that was made early, one of my many favorite topics to talk about, this idea of fidelity and integrity, often that conversation comes from this place of what's easy to observe, what's easy to manage. Well, it's really easy to manage that in our district, by the end of October, we expect all teachers to be at this point in the fidelity implementation of a curriculum. But that's not real. That's not what it means. That's not why we do things. We don't do any of this to keep on a pace, but to really understand how we manage the interactions between students and teachers better is a different thing. If we didn't talk to teachers about why we adopted a particular curriculum, why this is important to our work, what it means, why these interactions that are planned within our curriculum are meaningful in supporting students, it's really hard to show leadership in any of it. And so I feel like a lot of the things, the elements within curriculum-based professional learning help school leaders and help teachers ground, not just in what this looks like, but why. So when they necessarily make accommodations and modifications, they are doing those things from a place that understands not just what, but why, so that that element of coherence doesn't get broken. We often see in school systems, there is an agenda, there is a commitment, there is a mission, maybe a vision, and it gets broken time after time again, particularly when thinking about students with special needs, because we don't think about this larger vision of what we mean and we value for all students. And so I think that's an critical part to name, not just in concept, but also in degree of challenge, that this is something that we continue to work on. And I appreciate Lauren's quote that she pulled in about a teacher saying, yeah, I can sink my teeth into this for 2 to 3 years, and it continues to amaze me. I'll take a breath and say, in my decades of working in education, because it has been decades, how often we have to convince folks about the importance of learning in this profession of education that we are all in. So that's a super important point that I wanted to highlight. And I think that also touches on this challenge about what about UDL and high quality instructional materials. I've spent a lot of time this week, particularly talking to my colleagues about materials and what are the best intentions of good use of materials. And does anybody ever write a set of materials thinking that schools will start on page 1 and finish, the last day of school on the last page of the textbook? For sure not. And for sure they are necessarily requiring, what we have been calling skillful implementation. And sometimes direction about skillful implementation can be found within the book itself, to some of the comments that were made earlier. And sometimes it requires a continuous iteration, communities of practice, PLCs, but that is the work, that is the development, to understand all of that within the intent of the materials itself. So that's like one part of the conversation around leadership. And I think resources and leadership go hand in hand. We often, when Stephanie mentioned, when you see systems that are not coherent, what does it look like? I feel like use of resources is like the biggest telltale sign of, we believe in this, but we use resources like that. And so I think that is part of the challenge here. And then the other thing that I will just say, and I love, Michelle, your framing to this group about like, I'm going to give you a set of challenges and things to look for. And in my work currently at Student Achievement Partners, and certainly as I mentioned to you in my time before this, I was at the New Jersey Department of Education. Coherence at a state agency. Let's just all take a breath and realize that in most SEAs, we are really far away from that, and what a difference it makes. And we've seen little pockets of places, whether it's a state's commitment to early literacy efforts, whether it's a state's commitment, quite frankly, to supporting adoption of high quality instructional materials. I've been in many conversations where, folks that manage title programs aren't talking to the folks that support special needs students, aren't talking to the folks that manage standards and assessments. And what a great opportunity it would be to elevate the importance of coherence at a state agency level. And there are some, as I said, models for that to happen. But I would love to leave you all with the challenge of consideration, particularly in this part of the elements, these essentials of leadership, resources, and coherence at the state agency level. And so I appreciate all of this, and going back to this idea of how this all fits together. I've just appreciated being part of the development of the curriculum-based professional learning, because it is in my opinion, kind of like the glue that holds all of this together. If you consider curriculum as, you know, kind of the idea of what happens between kids and students every day in classrooms, and what role do we all play in supporting that to be an effective, meaningful, affirming experience for every single kid that walks the halls of our classrooms today. So with that, I would love to turn it back to Stephanie and Jim and see if there are any additional questions for the group.
I think that's where we're at. So the other thing I want to comment about my colleague Sandra is that she also has time to be president of a school board, which, having done that earlier in my life, I keep asking her how much longer she will continue to do that.
Thanks to COVID, not much longer, I promise you.
No, we need great people on school boards, and we appreciate you for making that commitment as well. So this is, we have about a 10-minute segment here for questions, comments. Jennifer, do you want to come back in the room, and do you want to kick us off with your observations, comments, reflections? or
Sure,
questions?
sure. I would love to. It's been fun watching the chat and sometimes participating in the chat as we go. I think a couple of the things that I'd love to reiterate were from the beginning of the conversation. And of course, we still have, Sandra touched on Kate Martin's question. I don't know if it was a question or an experience about high quality instructional materials and universal design for learning. And integrity between the two. So Kate, if you want to use your mic or use the chat and let us know if there was more that we could dig into with what.
Yeah, that would be great. I'd love to just have the conversation with folks who can kind of help parse this out. So, you know, big believer in getting teachers starting with high quality instructional materials, no question. They spend far too much time finding and mining and trying to put together curriculum. So no argument there. Where we're really coming from is just trying to make sure we go forward without going backwards. And so, you know, for a long time in education, we've been teaching toward this, you know, hypothetical and totally unreal middle of students. And the only thing normal about our students is their variance. So since they are so variable, I think we need to just be really transparent. There's not a material out there that's going to be built for all. It may be built for many, it may be built for most, but it won't be built for all. And so the struggle that I'm having is a lot of, not today, but in broadly, the high quality instructional materials conversation, I feel like to some extent is, again, leaving out our students with our more significant cognitive disabilities. And I worry about them, instead of having more access to the general education curriculum, having less, if we're not really empowering teachers to understand how to deal with variance and that curriculum. To be very transparent, I'm very concerned about going back to the place where we have to be on page 72 on Tuesday, August 8th, right? The idea that we're teaching content again, and we forget that we're actually teaching students. We have to know them. We have to make the resources work for them. I love the concept of high expectations. So I liked the quote in the presentation that because these are the expectations, instead of trying to get around the expectations, you really are pushed to think about access. My concern is, are we de-emphasizing or devaluing teachers in that process at all? So the UDL conversation has been a big one for us, because it's good to say that many high quality materials have have elements of universal design in some way embedded in them. But if we don't teach teachers that, do they really know how to get the most out of those materials? Do they really know how to use them to the largest degree? And I'd hate to see us, out of fear and this kind of need for so-called consistency, to get to a place where we're again teaching page 72 kind of to the middle child that doesn't really exist. So that's kind of where what we're struggling with. And And the first thing for me is the acknowledgement that these aren't perfect materials and they're not going to reach every kid. And so how do we best equip teachers, so-called beyond the book, to make sure that they believe all students can learn and then have the professional development that really helps them do that beyond, what's included in the book. So, and I'm talking a lot, but I'm just giving you kind of my internal dialogue. It's something we've been struggling over for about 6 months. I was very excited to see this topic today. But we really get down to it. We want to make sure that we go closer to all and not moving backwards into most, if that makes sense. So that's kind of where my head's at today.
Yeah, Kate, if I could just respond, one of the things that I maybe did not emphasize appropriately, and your eloquent and passionate comments caused me to want to restate. When we talk about curriculum-based professional learning, let us please not forget the importance of leaders being in those experiences as well, because oftentimes those pressures and pushes for everybody being on the same page on Tuesday, August 8th is about, because as a leader, that's easy for me to check. But if leaders truly understood the purpose and the interactions that are called for in high quality curriculum, then they're not looking for a page. They're not looking for a unit. They're not even looking for, they are actually looking for what is happening between students and teachers. What is the work that's being produced? What is the learning that is visible? And that's what we should all be looking for and supporting, not a pacing. And that's where I feel, leadership is one of those essentials in the elements. And, this isn't curriculum based just for the teachers.
Sure.
To a curriculum supervisor. And I think we often miss that. And we've often even said, like, in the world of these new Common Core standards, not new, 11 years old, let's remind ourselves of that. Like, standards themselves didn't ever leave a curriculum office. It was never something that principals talked about. It wasn't something superintendents even talked about. It was just what supervisors talked about. And it has become bigger than that. But I think the management against standards is absolutely problematic because, as you very aptly said, there is no textbook that will do for all kids. And, again, preaching to the choir, I know here, but textbooks also are not exactly curriculum to all the things that Stephanie entered into the conversation at the beginning. So
yeah, thank you for that. That's I think a really important point. I think my point that I'm worried about is that when I hear a lot of the high quality instructional materials conversations, I'm hearing about this idea of integrity versus fidelity, if at all, like as a 1-minute soundbite at the end, right? Instead of being really integral to the process of actually teaching the students who are in front of you versus, teaching what the book says. And to me, that's not a nuance. That's a really big deal. And I am concerned, not that we're getting high quality materials in the hands of kids, that's great, but I don't want to see us actually increase the gap in the process. And I'm very passionate about that because that's going backwards 10, 15 years versus forward. So I think for me, I really want this conversation not to talk about, the few kids it won't meet as a side thought, or the 1% that it might not address, or don't forget, you don't have to read from the book. Those should not be side notes. They should be integral to this conversation, because we all know that from this level, things have to go many, many steps before they get to the actual teacher. We can kill anything with implementation, right? And so how do we make sure that that is such a loud part of this conversation that it ends up helping our students with disabilities as much or more than everybody else?
Mhm.
And I wanted to also give Michelle Bowman, I believe you had some thoughts on this question, larger topic as well.
Thank you. So I'm going to speak from a practical perspective and probably reemphasize the importance of the student hat within the professional learning design, in that when I was working in a district and was responsible to oversee the K-12 mathematics resources and curriculum and instruction, one of the hallmarks was the partnership between myself, and the folks who were overseeing the special populations. And we did not have separate professional learnings when it came specifically to, curriculum and instruction. It was a joint scenario. And so, especially as we were implementing with a student hat process, then the teachers got to think about and experience the learning and think about multiple student perspectives, and how, when they were in these inquiry-based experiences, how would a student with a certain accommodation, how are they going to access this? Well, what does that mean that we need to know and understand and be able to do as the educators, not only the special population specialist, but also as the teacher who might be the typical teacher of record. And so within the process of learning and the design of curriculum-based professional learning, as we're presenting it here, that piece is not lost in the conversation. So Paul, I just wanted to reference and bring that forward again as well.
And oh my gosh, Kate, like if you want to come to my dinner parties, this is what we talk about all the time. It may not be the most exciting dinner party for everyone, but I think
It is for me.
Yeah, I think you'd like it with me. So there's a couple of things here that and I will try not to soapbox for like an hour, but if you want a separate one, I will. I am so with you. So two things. One, definitely curriculum is not a silver bullet. Anyone who starts pitching that curriculum is silver bullet is likely from a curriculum publisher agency, and you need to be like, hold up, no, right? Another thing to think about is how do we help teachers and coaches and leaders become critical consumers? So if there is no silver bullet, there is no Cinderella slipper we're looking for here. We are looking for the best materials to meet your kids, and then that decision needs to be made at the appropriate, like the closest you can tab to students that is appropriate. So thinking about who's at the table when you have the opportunity to select new materials. How do you help them? Like, which data are you bringing? Make sure that you're bringing the right student data and student perspectives there. And then how do you support teachers, again, being a critical consumer? What's good? What's not good? What are you necessarily going to have to modify to meet the needs of the students in your classroom? And Jennifer, you're getting it. How do we improve prep in this way? I think about all of the hours in coursework and prep about designing from scratch. And is there a way to shift that to designing to be a critical consumer and improve the base in order to address that?
Yeah, we certainly have OSEP funded educator preparation programs that are doing that that teach them as they go on how to, and they have kind of a protocol they can use, but they give them the tools so that once they're out on their own, they know how to look for the evidence. We also had a comment from Sarah Allen, who's a project officer at OSEP as well, about including related services personnel, especially if they have a more of a consultation based model that they're working from, because they, it's the whole child aspect, right? That there are things that go on outside of the classroom for many of our students, many of our children. And Stephanie, I know you had a couple of resources you wanted to share, so I wanted to make sure there was time for that. When you're still on mute.
I got it.
Thanks.
So I just want to point everybody to the Carnegie website, where in addition to the paper, there are a lot of other resources that an opportunity to continue the conversation with others. Obviously the reports there. Something else that I like to tell people about that's a lot of fun is an animation of the elements. And so if you're with people and you want to present it, it might be a nice way to introduce the elements. These 3 sheets that you see in the middle, roles and responsibilities, are prepared for teacher leaders. There also is one for system and school leaders. And then the third one is PD providers and coaches. And so I hope that's particularly relevant in the work that you're doing with others, and that maybe I would encourage you, write one for SEA, write one for your role in particular within the state. And we would love to share it and write about it. There's also just other resources from other organizations that are having the conversations. And then if you go deeper, there are lots and lots of case studies of how this work plays out in systems across the country. And you'll find all the different ways in which people take these ideas and they make them fit their context, their community, and their students. And it is not a one size fits all, but indeed it is about how do we make sure all students have access to rigorous and engaging curriculum. And that's kind of hopefully the message, the final message that, and we want teachers to experience what we want for their students. So I know we're right at the end of time and wanted to end on time. I think there may be one more slide, but this is just something else in there that will help you think about the shifts that we make from traditional. It's in the report and you saw it. It can be a fun exercise to generate the conversation. We didn't have time to talk about the roles and responsibilities, but I encourage you, like I said, to take a look at it. And that's it.
Great. Thank you so much. Stephanie, Jim, Michelle, Sandra, Lauren, thank you so much, all of you again for donating your time to us to have this conversation. And I loved the conversation is great. Obviously, our group wants to delve into it a little bit more. So I look forward to having that conversation with everyone. But this is, we had an earlier conversation about multi-tiered systems of support and students with the most significant needs. And some of we started off the conversation, our technical assistance center that works on this started off the conversation with some of the mythology around, so where are kids with disabilities, even not significant needs, where are kids with disabilities served? Is it, if you're talking about a triangle, is it they just receive services at the top of the triangle? And so there's this mythology that's where our students live, that's where and it's from the very beginning. It starts in tier 1 with the core curricula and the standards that are also meant for them. But those mythologies are important too, that, as you said, those assumptions that we start with. And so I think there's probably a lot of work to be done, but this is a great start. Thank you for the resources. Thank you for the ideas. Michelle, we look forward to hearing about the results of your study. And it's been a very nice afternoon. So thank you all.